Are we okay? We got the fucking... We've got to do the fucking shit that we for fucking drug abuse. No! Are you listening?
Sean here, and I wanted to discuss Lorne's prison journal. It's fascinating in a bizarre way. It's written in a manner that Lorne thinks in 100 years somebody would come across it, read it, and learn all about him and about his struggles and how he's a martyr. He didn't write it for himself. He didn't write it to even make it a book. He wrote it in the hopes that one day somebody would read it. Lorne does everything with the hope that one day somebody will find out, like the white knight syndrome, where he's defending everybody else in the hopes that they'll go back and tell them, well, you know the guy that was yelling and screaming and being a complete asshole to you? Well, he told me to be quiet when I called you something. Just like when he called your sister a crackhead, bitch. The same sister he called the worst names on the face of the planet, screamed at, threatened, abused, and he's worried about somebody calling Winnie a crackhead, bitch. Anyway, he hopes that somebody's going to pick up that journal and they're going to read it, and it's going to help his cause somehow. A lot of things to note in his journals. He writes a lot about other guys. He definitely didn't measure up, no pun intended, in high school. We know how he was treated. We know he wanted to be accepted more than anything else. We know he wanted to be loved. But when your behavior is turning everybody away, you're not going to get love and acceptance. So I think in prison, he probably attached himself to whoever would allow him to do so. And he would bother them, and he would follow them around, and they'd go eat, and here comes Lorne, up to the table where they are. This little 5'6" guy, looking like a melted ice cream cone. We talked about that. They put him together and said, you know what, good enough, I'm out. I'm not sure anyone would willingly go up to him and talk to him. Go up to him and say, oh, hey man, you look like an interesting guy. Lorne, I think, is one of those people, he wants his solitude. He wants to be alone, but at the same time, he wants people to be around him. And he's always at odds with himself. He feels inadequate. You know, his self-confidence is zero. But when other people are around, he can put up that facade. He can put up that wall. He can act like he's a tough guy. And I think in his prison journal, where he's writing, you know, I started handling everybody. I was beating everybody up. They were scared of me. Because he likes to watch what other people are doing. He likes to go back and think about all of the things that happened to him, and then think about what he should have done, or what he wishes he could have done. So he puts them in there. Like, so-and-so came up to me, I socked him in the nose, he was bleeding. I wouldn't be surprised if one of his prison journals that he had started out didn't have blood on it when he was over there writing that he busted somebody else's nose open, when we all know he was the one getting beaten up. Lorne is the kid who gets hit once in the face after causing all of the trouble, after starting it, after riling everybody up, poking and prodding, poking the bear, you would say. And he gets punched in the face after he pushed somebody else. He's going to cry. He's going to go to whatever authority figure he can find. Johnny hit me. So I know in prison, he was running his mouth. He was in protective custody. And we know why he was in protective custody, because he couldn't defend himself. He is the definition of fish. A 5'6" guy that you could rest a beer on. He's weak. He looks weak. He's gullible. He's an 87. And they would be coming in, taking his commissary every day. And before you know it, he'd be walking around next to some big guy who would have his hand in his back pocket. Lorne wasn't running anything. And he stayed in protective custody. And the other people in protective custody aren't exactly supermen. We're talking lots and lots of weak, broken people that are in there. Disgusting pedos. A lot of feminine men are in there. I'm not knocking them. I'm just telling you. A lot of people are in there that are not tough guys, so maybe, just maybe, Lorne kind of was a tough guy in that world. If you read the journal, you start to ask yourself, who is this really for? It's basically Lorne writing, the justice system is broken, they lured me, every excuse you've ever heard. I think people found out his charge. If you've known anybody in prison, as soon as somebody comes in, especially with a sentence like Lorne, 5 to 6 years or 10 or whatever, they're going to do a check. They're going to do a little background check on you. And it's going to come out what you did. And Lorne, this 5'6" weakling, it's going to come out that this crybaby, he tried to groom a kid, or he did groom a kid. Well, you know what I mean. And he tried to go there and have sex with her. Lorne wouldn't last very long, and he knew this. So in his journal, he could write about beating up the other sex offenders. But who was it really for? With the whole thing about making money and NBC and the justice system wanted to make a TV show, I can see Lorne writing in his journal and wanting to read it to other sex offenders that are in protective custody. Almost like he's writing it as some kind of legal document, and he's hoping that these people that would probably want to beat him up would learn all about the evils of NBC and Xavier Von Erck and how the federal government is corrupt, because in his mind, everybody in there, except for him, is guilty. I think Lorne was writing things down because he wanted to make it real. He wanted to convince himself that what he was saying was the truth. I was listening to Slash and Ilrig, and they were talking about the prison journal and how he repeated himself over and over. And that is true. And I wonder if repetition, the more you write it, the more you say it, the more you start to believe it. So Lorne kept writing it. I also wonder if he had a scrap journal, one that he tried to write before, but it just didn't say the law was evil enough times, or that he was innocent, or that he was lured, or TV show, money, whatever else it was that he was writing. I get the feeling that that is why he was doing a lot of this. Not to keep track of anything, but to convince himself, to have this journal full of bullshit that he could go back and read and say, you know, look what I did when I was in prison, you know? Everybody's the hero of their own story, and the winners write history. But Lorne in prison, there's nobody to tell him. I mean, he's in prison, he's obviously the loser, but he's writing this journal as if he's the hero. Like he's Odysseus, man. Theseus. He's the guy. And I really do believe he thinks that someone was going to read it, and it was going to be this epic story of how he was screwed by the law and how he eventually overcame. And they were going to make it, think about it, they were going to make a movie out of his life. This would be something that Lorne would think about. They're going to make a movie out of my life. I'm so confused. Maybe he really did think that. I'm actually shocked he didn't write a book about his crime, a real book, instead of that stupid Taken Abroad, and even worse, The Creature. Lorne is a narcissist, as I've said, to some degree, and you would think he would write a story not directly about himself, because I know there are laws against that, Son of Sam law or whatever, but something that was based on a true story, because you can say anything is based on a true story. A guy farted in a house, and all of a sudden you can make this entire movie about how there was a sound and they weren't sure where it came from. It ended up being ghosts, because Hollywood, when they say based on a true story, it's never based on a true story or true events. You can just loosely do that. So Lorne, he could have taken all the liberties in the world. He could have written his book. He could have said based on true events. The names have been changed. Whatever he wanted to do. But he didn't. And I'm surprised. So I think this prison journal had started out as that, as this heroic journal, the heroic saga, these chronicles. He doesn't have anybody. He only had his mom to write to, maybe Aunt Sharon or Roy or anybody he thought that he could just send a letter to. I wondered sometimes if he had pen pals in prison. some of these women who just want to communicate with these bad boys, these people that have been on TV, like Lorne, like To Catch a Predator, like the other men that were on there. They want a little bit of notoriety. They want to be able to tell their friends, I was communicating with, George Glass. I'm kidding. I was communicating with Eric Thornton or David Schumacher. There are groupies like that. I guarantee you Lorne did not have any groupies because they took one look at him and were like, yeah, no, we're going to pass. We're not going to bother with this guy. So who the fuck was he writing this for? It wasn't for anybody else but himself. And I know I've said that and I repeated myself, but I'm kind of reasoning this out. I'm trying to figure out who he thought was going to read this. The public? Was he going to release this as a book, as he alluded to? I doubt it. It wasn't written as it was a book. Maybe he thought they were notes. These were notes. He was writing notes that he was going to use to turn into a book. Maybe that could be a real possibility. A real possibility that he was using it to keep track of what he was going to go and write about. So maybe that was it. We all know though that this was not some sort of historical record. I mean, this dude was keeping track of bruises on other people and rashes and somebody taking a shit and farting. This is what Lorne does. And I think he was obsessed with those guys. He wanted to be like them, whoever they were. And when you're Lorne and you want to be like somebody, but you can't, you're going to point out all of their flaws. You're going to point out the things you don't like because you need to prove that they are just like you, that they aren't perfect, that they're not as cool as you initially thought they were or as others perceived them. I don't know if it was boredom or obsession or this delusion that somebody would read it one day and they'd read the heroics of Lorne Armstrong about a man that was railroaded by the justice system that should have never been in prison. So again, I think he wrote it for himself, and he wrote it in the hopes that somebody would be able to read it. I can't imagine he would think it would ever come out in court. I can't imagine he would ever think, they'd be in court. Your Honor, we'd like to admit this Lorne Armstrong journal. I can't see it happening. And I know his mom didn't read it. Roy definitely didn't read it. His siblings want nothing to do with him, so who knows? But those are my thoughts on this ridiculous drive through downtown traffic. I love you guys. I will see you in the next one.